Hello my friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. The video that I'm going to be doing today is talking to you about everything that I read in the month of December 2021. So this is sort of one of the last videos that I had aimed to do for my end of year content, and with this I will wrap up 2021 and I really appreciate a lot of what BookTube has brought to me in the year 2021 since I started my channel in April, and I'm hopeful that I can build on that going into 2022. So let's get into the things that I read in the month of December, of which there were 9 books, which is actually quite a few for me, but I did kind of get a jump start on one of my 2022 reading goals in December because I actually listened to 2 audiobooks, which was really great for me and which inflated my number a little bit because I usually would not read 9 books in a month, but it went really well. So let's just hop right into it. So just quickly, before I get into what I actually read, the breakdown of my reading this month was that I had 3 5-star reads, 1 4.5-star read, 2 4-star reads, 1 3.5-star, 1 3-star, and 1 2-star read. So I really covered the entire spectrum this month, but the fact that there was 3 5-stars and a 4.5-star and 2 4-stars really goes to show that, like, on the whole, I did have a really good reading month. The very first book that I read in the month of December was Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, which is the 3rd and final book in the Greenbone Saga trilogy. And I have actually already talked about this book and this series a little bit in my favorites of the year video because I actually started and finished the Greenbone Saga in 2021, and it's just phenomenal. And it's one of those series where the 3 books as a whole, once you're finished them, make the series as a whole even better than any of the individual books are by themselves. And I love when that happens, not only because of the fact that it's a new favorite for me, but because you get the satisfaction of knowing that the author probably crafted this series exactly the way that they wanted to, and like all of us, Fonda Lee and readers, just get the satisfaction of feeling that. And I don't really want to get too much into plot of Jade Legacy because of the fact that it's the final book, but you can look at my Jade War review if you would like some more of my thoughts. But this book just like elevated my connection and love for these characters even further. I don't even want to name any names because these characters are constantly in danger and I don't want to spoil even a hint of who makes it and who doesn't, but it like elevated my connection to these characters. They are so well done, so complex and deep and compelling, and not always like right or good necessarily, but like hard decisions have to be made and they struggle with things, and I just loved watching them grow. The series actually takes place over quite a long span of time, so we get to grow with the characters and grow throughout their lives. And the scope of the story also expands. I know that for some people that was not a strength, but I really liked the international aspects that were brought into this story because I thought that it was really appropriate for the themes that Fonda Lee was going for in terms of, well, the title of the book is literally what Jade means and what the honor code that they follow evolves into as the world evolves, and like literally what the legacy of Jade is going to be. It was just a phenomenal book and a phenomenal finale to that trilogy, and yeah, I'm gonna continue recommending it to everybody. So that was a very easy 5 stars. The second book that I read in the month of December was The Path of Daggers, the 8th book in the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and this one I really don't have too much to say about because I do have an in-depth spoiler chat for this. If you are interested, I will link that. and I don't really know how to talk about the 8th book in a series like The Wheel of Time without spoilers, but this is the first book where I did feel like I was experiencing the slog. So this was a 3-star read for me. I didn't hate it. I actually quite enjoyed the beginning and the end of this book, but the middle did drag a little bit for me. There were some very exciting things set up at the end of this book that I'm excited to explore in Winter's Heart, book 9, but on the whole, this just, it's not the best Wheel of Time book, like by a large margin, so it got 3 stars. It was just like good to okay. Like I didn't hate it, but I do understand. The 3rd book that I read in December was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, and I don't have TikTok personally, but I have heard that this book was a phenomenon on Book Talk, and that a lot of people have heard about it from there, and that a lot of people have picked it up. I mean, I did know that this was very popular right now when I picked it up, and so I was looking forward to it for that reason, but aside from its popularity, I really didn't know too much about it, aside from the fact that our setup here is that our main character, Olive, is a PhD student, and she is in the biological sciences, and she has gotten herself into a situation such that she thought it appropriate to pretend to be dating someone who turns out to be a professor also at her school, and she needs to fake date her way in this situation in order to avoid other conflict in her life. And I mean, I literally just love the fake dating trope. Like, I will read it again and again and again, even though I know the story beats. I know how the plot of a fake dating story should and does play out. I enjoy it every single time. And the fact that I went to grad school in the sciences, and that's where this is set, and there are certain things in here that like Olive goes through that I literally felt in my soul. Like, I thought the representation of science grad school was, like, while sensationalized a little bit for a book and storytelling, like, fictional purpose, actually really well represented in here. So I enjoyed the book on that level as well, and this was just like, I devoured this in I think 2 days, and I loved it. It was so good. Did I say that I gave this 5 stars? I gave this 5 stars. This was such a good time. I had so much fun, and I just loved reading this. The 4th book that I read in December was The Fall of Babel by Josiah Bancroft, which is the 4th and final book in the Books of Babel. So this one, at the time when I finished it, I was hovering between a 4 and a 4.5, but I ended up settling on a 4-star rating for this eventually because I still enjoyed this, and I thought that it was a solid conclusion to this series, but it just didn't quite capture me the same way that the previous 3 books did, and it just wasn't like capturing that magic that I felt before. I do think that there were some weaker parts in this book. I thought that the first section was very long and not as engaging. We follow a character that we hadn't spent time with in a while, so you go from a whirlwind of the end of the 3rd book to sort of feeling a little bit disconnected from what was happening because we have gone to a different place to spend time with another character, and then you have to wait a while to get back to like who we were following before. So I didn't love that, even though I don't mind that character. It wasn't my favorite way to start the book, and it wasn't the most engaging part of the book. There is one character in particular that I thought was underutilized in here because their head is by far the most interesting place to be, in my opinion. I love seeing their perspective, the way that they think about things. I do love a lot of the characters in here, don't get me wrong, but I just felt that the focus was a little bit less where I was hoping for it to be and a little bit more spread out, which might have been a strength for some people. But I think that that was part of why it didn't capture me quite as much, because I wasn't getting to spend time with the character that I did want to the most. So, like, obviously I'm being very vague. I don't really want to say anything about the plot of this because, again, it's the finale of a series. But I still think that the Books of Babel is like a really, really solid series that I will continue to recommend. Josiah Bancroft's prose is still gorgeous. I do think that he does great character work because, like I said, I do love a lot of these characters. I love most of these characters. So there is just a weakness in here that didn't allow it to be on the same level as the first 3 books for me, but still 4 stars and still a solid book. The next book that I read in December was Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Look at how tiny it is. I'm holding it up and feeling the difference between holding like any of the huge fantasy books. But this is a classic. This is the first John Steinbeck that I have ever read, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It is very short, so, I mean, it is a novella. So it is very short. We follow Lenny and George, who are both manual laborers who travel together. Lenny is simple-minded. He has the mind basically of a child. He's good-hearted, but he is a huge man that can hurt people without realizing it. He can be very intimidating without realizing it. And his companion George is sort of like a quick-witted, small man, and they actually have a very sweet and supportive relationship because you can tell that George is very protective of Lenny and protective of what people might think of him or the assumptions that people might make of him. And they go to work in a new place, and I'm sure that a lot of people have had to read this book for school at some point along their careers, but I was never required to read this in English class. So I was just very pleasantly surprised because this is not a complex story. It's actually a very simple story, but for me, that allowed the emotions and the themes to really shine through in what John Steinbeck was trying to do. And his prose is really accessible, but also in a way that's sort of beautiful. Like his word choice, well, okay, beautiful isn't quite the right word because it's not like delicate or flowery or anything, because the nature of what he's writing about isn't meant to be romanticized, I guess, but it's just very, maybe elegant is a better word, because he does exactly what he wants to do with the words while also doing a really good job of making it flow and allowing you to see what he's describing to you. Great word choice, and he really captures the way that people sound and the way that they kind of act and look. So his characters are very distinct in that way as well. I just really enjoyed this. It's a classic, so I don't really know like how much I can say about it because I'm not trying to do any kind of like literary analysis. But yeah, this was 4 stars for me. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to reading East of Eden by him as well, now that I've dipped my toes in with this. The next book that I finished in December was my first audiobook of the month, and that was Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. And I selected this one because well, for one, I really like Neil Gaiman. I'm interested in mythology. And it was also a pretty short audiobook. So if you've watched my reading goals video, I am trying to get into audiobooks, and I'm trying to not overwhelm myself because I don't think that audio is my best way of absorbing information. I really need to focus on it. So I'm trying to find books where I can use them to accustom myself to this method of like consuming storytelling. So Norse mythology was great for this because, like I mentioned, I'm really interested in mythology and I find the Norse myths extremely interesting. But the thing that really worked for me was, well, aside from Neil Gaiman's narration, because that was great, but these are obviously broken up into stories because the myths are being told to you as like separate chapters or stories. So I could put this audiobook on, listen to a story, and then put it away until I was ready, and that was one story encapsulated in itself. So that was a great thing for me, and I loved that they were all separate like that. So this was a great audiobook experience. Like, Neil Gaiman's voice is very easy to listen to, and I love hearing the stories about Loki, Thor, Odin, so I just find that really fun. And I did give this audiobook 4.5 stars, and I got it from my library, so that was amazing. I used Libby for that, and I was able to just return it when I was done. And at some point in the future, maybe I'll want to read Norse mythology in physical form too, but I really do feel like I got a lot out of the experience of those myths and really enjoyed them. The next book that I read in December was The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, and this is another book that you may have just heard me talk about in my favorite books of 2021 video. So I go a little bit more in depth on my thoughts there. I don't want to go too in depth here, but The Bear and the Nightingale is essentially the story of Vasya, our main character, is born into this forest town in fantasy Russia, or historical Russia really, but obviously it's a fantasy world. And she has a bloodline that carries some ancient and really interesting magic in it, but her mother dies in childbirth with her. So Vasya grows up without a mother, and eventually her father remarries, and her new stepmother is very devoutly Christian, but in these more remote areas of Russia, the people still have sort of their traditional folklore that they are faithful to, and they have other spirits that sort of exist around them, but the pressure is on from the church and from Christians to be more faithful to God and less faithful to these other creatures and things. So that is sort of the catalyst for our story, and Vasya is a fantastic main character. This book is so atmospheric and so like cold. Winter is the perfect time to read this, as you might be able to tell by the cover. And this is very steeped in like a fairy tale type of telling and Russian folklore, which felt very magical to me because I don't know that much about Russian folklore. So I really liked the mystery aspect of it, where for me, I didn't necessarily know where this was going, so it really felt like a fairy tale. And I just really, really loved basically everything about The Bear and the Nightingale. I did give it 5 stars, and I am hopefully going to continue with this trilogy in February. So I haven't actually set up my reading plans for February yet, but I've been thinking about how I really want to get back to it as soon as I can. The next book that I read in December, and unfortunately my lowest rated of the month, was A Spindle, Splintered by Alex E. Haro, which I also listened to on audiobook. And this was a novella, so a very short audiobook, but this is the story of a girl in our real world who is diagnosed with a disease that has basically given her to around the age of 21 to live. And she is obsessed with the myth and the fairy tale of Sleeping Beauty. She knows everything there is to know about that story, every historical retelling of it. She just knows her fairy tale about this woman who has been cursed from birth to prick her finger on a spinning wheel and then sleep, because this is basically analogous to the curse that she has been given in her disease, where she is not meant to live a very long life. I like that setup. I think it's really interesting, but there were a few like glaring weaknesses of this book for me personally. One of them was it had so many pop culture references. You could barely get through like 30 seconds of listening to this book without there being a pop culture reference and fourth wall breaking and this very self-aware, like sarcastic, sassy tone, which sometimes works for me, and it may have been the audiobook affecting my experience with this, but I do think that it was really over the top in this book. Like, she even shoehorned in a Harold, they're lesbians. And while I think that's a great meme, it's the fourth wall breaking that just breaks my immersion so thoroughly from this book that I could never quite get myself really connected to it. And then the second thing is very similar to what I just said, where like I couldn't get myself connected to it. This felt like it was moving really fast to hit the beats of the fairy tales, and we were kind of going through the motions, like the characters were going through the motions, and there would be things like, oh, the king looked exactly how you would expect a king to look, or the dark creepy forest looked exactly how you would expect a dark creepy forest to look in a fairy tale such as this. And I get the cheekiness of those statements and the purpose that they're meant to serve, but when things aren't actually described by the author, then I can't quite like fit myself in. I can't get my brain really as engaged, because I'm just thinking about the fact that the author didn't really describe to me what things look like. And so I'm not visualizing, I'm not connecting with the characters, I'm not getting the emotion out of the scene. It's things like that. So that was the other weakness, where I couldn't ever fully get connected to the characters. So I felt like their character arcs were just vessels for the lessons and themes that the author wanted to get across in this book, rather than it being more subtle, where instead of being told the conversations that the author is trying to have, you like feel them naturally happen through the book. So unfortunately, the execution of that just didn't work for me, and A Spindle Splintered ended up being a 2-star read for me. My final book of the month and my final book of the year 2021 was China Rich Girlfriend, which is the second book in the Crazy Rich Asians series by Kevin Kwan, and this was a 3.5-star read for me. I really don't have too much to say about this. I think that a lot of people know about Crazy Rich Asians because of the movie, and the way that I describe it is almost like Asian Gossip Girl, except they are way richer. And this book is kind of just like candy to me. Like, that's the best way that I can describe it. Like, you are meant to feel how dramatic and scandalous and over the top and ridiculous that these people are that we're reading about in this book. And there are a few more down-to-earth people that you're able to connect to a little bit more, but for the most part, it's just pure entertainment value. Like, I find it very entertaining, but I honestly don't take too much depth from it. And that's not what I'm looking for when I pick up one of these books. So this was a 3.5. I didn't like it quite as much as the first one, which I believe that I gave 4 stars, but it was still good. It did exactly what I wanted it to do, and it was very entertaining. So overall, even though I read books in December that fell pretty much everywhere on my rating spectrum, I still had a really, really great reading month. I had 2 favorites of the entire year in the month of December, which were Jade Legacy and The Bear and the Nightingale, and aside from that, I did really enjoy myself. I'm glad that I got to more audiobooks, and I'm hoping to continue with that trend. And I also read a few different genres. We had some contemporary, some romance, a classic, and obviously some fantasy, but you know, I like to branch out a little bit, so I'm very happy that I did that, and yeah, it was a good month. So let me know what you think of the books that I read this month. I know that some of you have already told me your thoughts after hearing about a few of these in my favorites of the year, but for the rest of these books, let me know if you've read them, if you plan on reading them, what you think of them, and let me know what your favorite thing was that you read in the month of December. So I really hope that you liked this video. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content from me, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!